They say that when Pastor Jeremiah Kuta finally knelt beside his daughter's hospital bed, his hands trembling as they reached for hers, the machines around them beeped with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. For 20 years he had promised miracles to thousands, wheelchairs abandoned in aisles, testimonies of blind eyes opened, cancers supposedly vanished. But now, watching his 16-year-old daughter's chest rise and fall beneath an oxygen mask, he understood something that would break him completely. All the power he claimed to possess, all the prayers he had shouted into microphones, all the oil he had blessed and bottled and sold, none of it could save the one person who had believed in him most. The man of fire, they called him. But that night, he was just a father watching his child die, and heaven had never felt more silent. Before we dive deeper into this story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. This is not just another story about faith and deception. It is about a man who climbed so high on the ladder of other people's hope that he forgot what truth felt like. It is about the moment when everything you built becomes the prison you cannot escape. And it is about the question that haunts us all. What happens when the person selling salvation realizes they have none left for themselves? Pastor Jeremiah Kuta was not born a fraud. He was not always the man in expensive suits, riding in convoys, speaking to crowds of 50,000. There was a time when his faith was pure, when his prayers were whispered, not performed. But somewhere between the mango tree and the golden stage, something changed. And by the time he realized what he had become, it was almost too late. Jeremiah grew up in Ogboko, a small village where red earth stuck to your feet, and the church bell was the only clock anyone needed. His mother, Mama Ruth, sold vegetables in the market: tomatoes, peppers, okra piled high on wooden tables under a tattered umbrella. She was a widow, and widows in Ogboko carried their grief like a second skin, visible in the way they walked, in the hymns they sang while cooking. But Mama Ruth had something else, an unshakable belief that her son was chosen. She would tell him this every morning before he left for school, pressing his Bible into his hands like it was made of gold. "Jeremiah," she would say, her voice soft but certain, "God has a plan for your mouth. One day, your words will heal people." He believed her because children believe their mothers, and because when you grow up hungry, you need something bigger than your circumstances to hold on to. By the time he was 24, Jeremiah had dropped out of the seminary, not because he lost faith, but because the classes felt too slow, too theoretical, too removed from the burning conviction that pulsed in his chest. He wanted to preach now, not after years of study, so he returned to Ogboko and started preaching under a mango tree in the village square. At first, only 15 people came, then 30, then 100. He did not promise miracles in those early days. He spoke about forgiveness, about the weight of shame, and how God's love could lift it. People cried not because of spectacle, but because his words felt true. They felt like someone finally understood the ache they carried in silence. Within 2 years, the crowd under the mango tree had grown so large that the village elders gave him a plot of land to build a church. Fire of Glory Ministries began as a modest structure: cement blocks, zinc roof, wooden benches. But Jeremiah's voice, that deep, resonant voice, began to attract attention beyond Ogboko. People came from neighboring towns, then from the city. They came because in a country where hospitals were expensive and hope was cheap, a man who spoke with certainty about divine intervention felt like the only medicine they could afford. And Jeremiah, hungry, passionate, still young enough to believe he was invincible, saw the crowds and mistook their desperation for confirmation that God was using him. He had no idea that he was standing at the edge of something that would consume him. The turning point came on a Sunday in the rainy season. A woman named Sister Blessing brought her son to the service, a boy of 7 who had been limping since birth. She placed him in front of the altar and wept openly, her body shaking with the kind of grief only a mother knows. Jeremiah felt something that day, a surge of compassion so strong it felt like electricity. He placed his hands on the boy's twisted leg and prayed, not loudly, not for show, but with tears streaming down his face. And when the boy stood and took 3 steps without limping, the church erupted. People screamed, fainted, rushed forward to touch Jeremiah's robe. News of the healing spread like wildfire. Within weeks, Fire of Glory Church could not contain the crowds. They spilled into the streets, waiting for hours just to get inside. Cameramen arrived, radio stations called, and then the politicians came, men in dark glasses and convoys, sitting in the front row, donating large sums, whispering that Jeremiah should expand, that he had a gift too powerful to be wasted on a village. He should have been cautious. He should have remembered his mother's warnings about pride. But when money flows like a river and people call you anointed, it is easy to believe you are untouchable. Jeremiah built a new church, massive, modern, with air conditioning and stadium seating for 10,000. He hired a media team, musicians, dancers. His services became productions. Every Sunday, wheelchairs were rolled to the front. People writhed on the floor, claiming demons were leaving their bodies. Envelopes thick with cash were dropped at the altar, and Jeremiah would hold them up, shouting, "Your seed has been planted. Your miracle is on the way." He began selling anointing oil, prayer cloths, wristbands blessed for breakthrough. His face appeared on billboards across the state. "Come experience your miracle, Pastor Jeremiah Kuta, Man of Fire." And the people came, thousands upon thousands. Because when life is hard and the future is uncertain, a man who guarantees miracles feels like the only hope you have. But in the midst of all this, the lights, the cameras, the worship from strangers, there was one person whose faith never wavered, whose belief in him remained pure. His daughter, Naomi. She was 12 when the ministry exploded, and she never asked for anything. She sang in the choir, always barefoot, because she said it made her feel closer to God. She would sit in his office after services, helping him count offerings, and she would say, "Papa, God is so good to us." And Jeremiah would smile, kissing her forehead, never telling her that he had started to doubt whether any of it was real. It happened on a Sunday morning during the praise and worship segment. The choir was singing, hands raised, voices harmonizing in a way that made even skeptics feel something. Naomi stood in the front row, her voice rising above the others, her face glowing with the kind of joy that cannot be faked. And then, mid-verse, she stopped. Her eyes rolled back, her body stiffened, and before anyone could reach her, she collapsed onto the stage. The music stopped. The cameras kept rolling. People gasped, then rushed forward, forming a circle around her. Jeremiah was at the pulpit when it happened. For a moment he froze, not in fear, but in disbelief. This could not be happening. Not to her, not to his daughter, not in front of 10,000 people and live cameras broadcasting to the nation. He ran to her, pushing through the crowd, shouting her name, but Naomi did not respond. Her lips were turning blue. Her body was limp. The ushers called for an ambulance, and within minutes she was being wheeled out on a stretcher, oxygen mask pressed to her face. Jeremiah rode with her, his white suit stained with her sweat, his hands shaking as he held hers. At the hospital, the doctor, a tired man with glasses and a weary expression, delivered the diagnosis that would shatter Jeremiah's world. "She has a rare blood disorder," the doctor said, his voice clinical, detached. "It is aggressive. Without proper treatment, she has maybe 3 months. The treatment is expensive and difficult. We will need to start immediately." Jeremiah stared at him, unable to process the words. 3 months. Expensive. Treatment. These were not words that should apply to his daughter. He was the man of fire. He had prayed for thousands. He thought he had seen, miracles happen. Surely this was just a test. Surely God would not let his daughter die. But as he sat in that sterile hospital room, listening to machines beep and watching Naomi's chest rise and fall in labored breaths, a cold truth began to settle in his bones. He had no idea how to pray for her. All his prayers had been performances. All his words had been scripts designed to elicit reactions from crowds. He had never actually believed in the power he claimed to possess. He had only believed in the belief of others. And now, with his daughter's life hanging by a thread, he realized that belief was not enough. So instead of humility, instead of accepting the doctor's help and trusting medicine alongside faith, Jeremiah chose pride. He gathered his closest followers, stood at Naomi's bedside, and declared, "My daughter will not die. I serve a God who does not fail. We will pray, and she will be healed." The church rallied around Naomi's illness like it was a crusade. Prayer vigils were held every night. People fasted. They brought offerings specifically for her healing. Thousands of naira piled on the altar with notes attached. "For pastor's daughter, let this be her breakthrough." Jeremiah refused chemotherapy. He refused blood transfusions. He told the doctors that God would handle it, that their medicine was an insult to divine power. And for a while, the church believed him. They had to, because if Pastor Jeremiah, the man of fire, could not heal his own daughter, then what did that say about all the miracles they had witnessed? What did that say about the money they had sown, the faith they had invested? But as weeks turned into months, Naomi grew weaker. Her skin became pale, almost translucent. Her hair began to fall out in clumps. She stopped singing. She stopped smiling. And still, Jeremiah stood on stage every Sunday shouting, "My daughter shall live. I declare it by faith." The media began to turn on him. Videos of Naomi being carried into the church, thin, fragile, barely conscious, leaked online. Social media erupted with criticism. "Where is your miracle now, Pastor?" they mocked. "Why don't you heal your own child?" Attendance at Fire of Glory began to drop. People whispered in the parking lot. Some stopped coming altogether. The donations slowed to a trickle. Jeremiah's inner circle started to fracture. His assistant pastor suggested gently that perhaps they should reconsider medical treatment. Jeremiah fired him on the spot, because to admit that prayer was not working, to admit that he had been wrong, would mean admitting that everything, the empire, the miracles, the entire ministry, had been built on sand. And so he doubled down. He organized a 3-day healing crusade specifically for Naomi. Thousands attended, filling the church with desperate hope. They laid hands on her. They anointed her with oil. They spoke in tongues until their voices were hoarse. And Naomi, too weak to protest, simply lay there, her eyes distant, her breathing shallow. On the 3rd night, after hours of prayer, Jeremiah raised his hands and declared, "It is done. My daughter is healed." The crowd erupted in praise. But when Jeremiah looked down at Naomi, expecting to see her sit up, expecting some sign of improvement, she only stared back at him with an expression that broke his heart. It was not anger. It was not even disappointment. It was pity, as if she knew something he did not, as if she had already accepted what he refused to. That night, unable to sleep, unable to pray, Jeremiah got in his car and drove. He did not tell anyone where he was going. He just drove through empty streets and dark roads until he found himself at the base of a mountain on the outskirts of the state. It was the same mountain he had climbed 20 years ago, back when he was just a young preacher with more passion than sense. Back then, he had gone up that mountain desperate for something, power, anointing, a sign that God had truly called him. And on that mountain, he had met someone. The memory was hazy now, distorted by time and denial. It was late at night, and Jeremiah had been praying for hours, weeping into the dirt, begging God to use him. And then, out of the darkness, a figure had appeared, a man, or something like a man, dressed in white. The figure had not spoken at first, only watched him with eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone. And then, in a voice that felt like it was coming from inside Jeremiah's own head, the figure had said, "You want power? You want people to believe?" Jeremiah had nodded, too desperate to question. "Then I will give it to you," the figure said. "As long as they believe, you will have power. As long as their faith is strong, Miracles will follow. But remember this: what is built on their belief will crumble the moment you need your own. Jeremiah had not understood what that meant. He had taken the words as a blessing, a covenant, a promise that God was going to use him. He had descended the mountain filled with confidence, and within weeks the miracles began. But now, standing at the base of that same mountain 2 decades later, those words echoed in his mind with new meaning. What is built on their belief will crumble the moment you need your own. He climbed. The path was overgrown now, harder to navigate, but his legs remembered the way. He climbed until his lungs burned, until his expensive shoes were caked in mud, until he reached the same clearing where he had knelt all those years ago. And there, under a sky thick with clouds, Jeremiah fell to his knees and screamed. Not a prayer, not a plea, just a raw, guttural scream that tore out of him like something dying. "Take it," he shouted into the wind. "Take the ministry, take the fame, take the money. Just let her live, please, just let my daughter live." But the wind did not answer. The mountain did not tremble. And Jeremiah realized, with a horror that sank deep into his soul, that there was no deal to be made. There never had been. The power he thought he possessed had always been an illusion, a trick of belief, a performance sustained by the faith of desperate people. And now, when he needed something real, there was nothing there. He returned home as the sun rose, exhausted, covered in dirt, his spirit shattered. The house was quiet, too quiet. He walked to Naomi's room and found her asleep, her breathing so faint he had to press his ear to her chest to hear her heartbeat. It was barely there. The doctor had called the night before, leaving a message that Jeremiah had ignored. "Pastor, if you do not authorize treatment within the next 48 hours, there is nothing more we can do." Jeremiah sat beside her bed, staring at her face, so thin now, so fragile, and for the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his failure. He had built an empire on promises he could not keep. He had taken money from people who could not afford to give it. He had sold hope like it was a product, packaged and branded and marketed. And now the one person who had truly believed in him was dying because of his pride. There was a knock at the door. Jeremiah ignored it, but the knocking persisted, soft but insistent. Finally, he stood and opened it, ready to tell whoever it was to leave. But the woman standing there stopped him cold. She was old, impossibly old it seemed, with skin like worn leather and eyes that burned with a strange intensity. She was wrapped in faded cloth, leaning on a wooden cane, and she looked at Jeremiah with something between pity and recognition. "Pastor," she said softly, her voice crackling like dry leaves. "Do you remember me?" Jeremiah shook his head. She smiled, a sad, knowing smile. "I was at your first crusade, the one under the mango tree 20 years ago. You prayed for my son. You laid hands on him and declared that his sickness would leave. And it did, for a while." Jeremiah's throat tightened. "What do you mean, for a while?" The old woman's smile faded. "He got better for 3 months. Everyone called it a miracle. But then the sickness came back. Worse than before. He died 6 months later." Jeremiah felt the ground shift beneath him. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I wanted to believe," she said simply. "Because believing felt better than the truth. And you were so convinced, Pastor, so sure of yourself. How could I question that? How could any of us?" She stepped closer, her cane tapping against the floor. "But I have watched you all these years. I have seen the empire you built. And I have seen the way you sold hope to people like me, people who had nothing left but faith. And now your daughter is dying, and you finally understand what we all learned too late." "What is that?" Jeremiah whispered, his voice breaking. "That miracles cannot be bought," she said, "and power built on the belief of others will fail the moment you need it for yourself." Jeremiah sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Then what do I do?" he choked out. "How do I save her?" The old woman placed a wrinkled hand on his head, and for a moment he felt something he had not felt in years, genuine compassion, untainted by expectation or transaction. "You stop pretending to be God," she said gently, "and you start being a father." She turned and walked away, disappearing into the early morning light, leaving Jeremiah kneeling in the doorway, broken and finally, terribly, awake. That night Jeremiah sat beside Naomi's bed and prayed. Not as the man of fire, not as Pastor Jeremiah Kuta, but as a father who had run out of answers. He did not shout, he did not perform. He simply whispered, his voice cracked and raw, "God, I do not know if you are listening. I do not know if I ever truly heard you or if I just heard what I wanted to hear. But if you are real, if you are merciful, please forgive me. Forgive me for using your name to build my own kingdom. Forgive me for treating faith like a business. And if you will not heal her, then please just hold her, because I cannot." Jeremiah called the doctor the next morning and authorized treatment, chemotherapy, blood transfusions, everything the doctor recommended. The church board tried to stop him, warning that it would destroy his credibility, that people would lose faith. But Jeremiah did not care anymore. For the first time in 20 years, he was not thinking about the ministry. He was thinking about his daughter. The treatment was brutal. Naomi's body, already weakened, struggled with every session. There were moments when Jeremiah thought they had made the decision too late, when the machines beeped in ways that made his heart stop, when nurses rushed in with urgent expressions. But slowly, painfully, Naomi began to stabilize. Her blood counts improved. Her breathing became easier. The doctors called it a miracle, the kind that happens when science and timing and the resilience of the human body align in just the right way. But Jeremiah knew it was not his doing. It was not the result of his prayers or his anointing or his faith. It was simply what happened when you stopped performing and started trusting doctors, trusting medicine, trusting that maybe God works through people with stethoscopes and not just people with microphones. News of Naomi's treatment leaked. The backlash was immediate. Social media exploded with accusations. Pastor Jeremiah finally admits he is a fraud. Man of fire turns to medicine because his prayers do not work. False prophet exposed. The church emptied. Members who had stood by him for years walked away, feeling betrayed. The board called an emergency meeting and voted to remove him as head pastor. His television contract was canceled. His billboards were taken down. Fire of Glory Ministries International, once a sprawling empire, crumbled in a matter of weeks. And Jeremiah did not fight it. He signed the papers. He handed over the keys. He packed his office in silence, taking only a photo of Naomi and the old Bible his mother had given him, because somewhere in the collapse, he had found something he had lost long ago: peace. The kind of peace that comes not from being right, but from being honest. Not from being powerful, but from being broken enough to admit you were never powerful at all. Naomi recovered slowly. It took months. But the day she walked out of the hospital, her hand in his, Jeremiah felt something he had not felt in years: gratitude, not for miracles, not for blessings, just for breath, just for life. Jeremiah and Naomi returned to Ogboko. The village had not changed much. The mango tree was still there, older, its branches heavier. Mama Ruth had passed away 5 years earlier, but her vegetable stand still stood in the market, now run by a distant cousin. Jeremiah bought a small plot of land near the old church and built something simple: a clinic. It was nothing fancy, just a few rooms, basic medical equipment, a nurse on staff 3 days a week. But it was free for children who could not afford treatment. He named it after Naomi. She helped him run it, organizing supplies, talking to the mothers who brought their sick children, offering them not miracles, but care. People from the village were suspicious at first. They remembered the billboards, the television appearances, the spectacle. They asked him why he came back, what he was trying to prove. And Jeremiah would smile, a tired but genuine smile, and say, "I am not trying to prove anything. I am just trying to make up for lost time." Occasionally, people from the old ministry would find him, people who still believed, who still wanted the man of fire to return. They would beg him to start preaching again, to rebuild the church, to bring back the Crusades. And Jeremiah would listen patiently, then shake his head. "I cannot give you what I do not have," he would say, "but I can give you this: honesty, and maybe that is worth more than miracles." One evening, a year after they returned, Naomi found him sitting under the mango tree, staring at the sunset. She sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Papa," she said softly, "do you miss it? The church, the crowds, all of it?" Jeremiah was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I miss the version of me who believed it was real, but I do not miss the lie." She squeezed his hand. "Do you still believe in God?" He looked at her, this girl who had almost died because of his pride, who had every reason to hate him, and yet who sat beside him with forgiveness in her eyes. "Yes," he said, "but not the God I used to preach about. That God was just a reflection of my ego. The God I believe in now is quieter, smaller, less impressive, but more real." "Good," Naomi said, smiling, "because that is the God I believe in too." They sat there as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. And for the first time in 20 years, Jeremiah felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Not on a stage, not in front of cameras, but here, under a tree, with his daughter alive beside him, and no miracles left to sell. So let me ask you this. What does faith mean to you? Is it the expectation of miracles, the belief that if you pray hard enough, give enough, believe enough, the universe will bend to your will? Or is it something quieter, something that survives even when prayers go unanswered and the miracles never come? Jeremiah learned the hardest way possible that real faith is not about power. It is not about performance. It is about surrender. Surrender to truth, to humility, to the reality that we are all just fragile, flawed, desperate creatures trying to make sense of a world we cannot control. He sold miracles for 20 years, and in the end, the only real miracle was the one he almost missed. The chance to be honest, the chance to be forgiven, the chance to start again. Would you have had the courage to walk away from everything you built, even if it meant losing your reputation, your livelihood, your identity? Would you have chosen your child over your pride? Tell me in the comments. And if this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that sometimes the greatest miracles are the ones that happen when we stop pretending and start being human, then subscribe, because there are more stories like this, stories that dig into the uncomfortable truths we all carry, waiting to be told. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the best thing we can do is let the empire burn, so something real can grow from the ashes.